right, we're going to talk about the CrossFit Games season changes. I guess
more changes.
Yeah, more changes, but they promise consistency. So we brought Adam on because he works with quite a few athletes that are kind of all over from games level to semifinal level to those that are fighting for quarterfinals. I think he's a good person to have on and kind of talk about how do you think about the season changes if you're at each of those stages, and then also what are we going to look at like in 5 years or 10 years, because that's what we're pushing towards, is some kind of consistent format that we can have standards.
That's what I would want, right? I think that the timeline for these changes has been like 6 or 7 years now. I mean, it always used to be open regionals games, and it lived like that for a while. And then we went into national champions, we went into sanctionals, now we're in semifinals, and now it's shifting again where they're reducing the number of semifinals. I think the big thing that everybody wants in the sport is we want it to be predictable. We want it to be consistent from year to year. We want to know that the best are getting to the games. The people who want to compete at each level below that are still getting the opportunities to do so. And we also just want to improve participation across the board, attendance at the events. How can we try and get more eyes on all of these people to make sure that the sport grows, the fitness movement in general grows, which I know that we always talk about those two kind of being different things, but when you hear Justin Berg and Adrian Bosman talk about it, they are very aligned. They're very together. So it's like they want the games to grow, but they almost want the games to grow as a means to increase exposure for the affiliate level, to get more people in the doors, to get more people in the gyms. And then as this number goes up, the attendance goes up over here. So they kind of see it in synchrony. So I'd like to think that when they're thinking through these changes, they're thinking about how both of those are going to benefit. I think it muddies the waters, maybe makes it more complicated. But that's the goal, I think, at the end of the day, is to make sure that the spectacle of the event of the CrossFit Games is still like held up really high, and you get a chance for all these athletes who are trying to be professionals to really showcase what they've done. At the same time, trying to make sure that the fitness movement that is CrossFit, that lives inside of the doors of the affiliate, is still growing and prospering and touching more people over time. So
I'm a huge fan of doing it that way, because for those that have listened to our podcast, you've heard me talk about this. It's like, how can we get more viewers, more eyes on the sport? Yeah. And to do that, you have to grow at the affiliate level. And then obviously with marketing, grow, maybe just viewership in general on YouTube, or if they have another rights deal with CBS or ESPN or someone that they can connect with in the future. But to do that, again, it's got to be a grassroots thing first. The affiliates have to tell other people, come to my gym, and then from there they watch maybe the CrossFit Games or something like that.
Yeah, I think you cast that net as wide as possible at the affiliate level, at the open level. Those kinds of people where they're going to be participating maybe for the first time, get a taste of it, and they're like, oh wait, this is pretty cool, and then they start to become fans deeper and deeper into the sport. But it's got to grab them early on. And I think one of the things that they did this year, which I really like, is they're opening up open registration earlier.
Yeah.
So in the past, it was basically like a couple weeks before the open. Yeah, I guess I might sign up. This is going to be interesting. Opening up the registration in November, I think, is a really interesting move. It's not going to come with a lot of fanfare, but what you get out of it is you get somebody to sign up in November, and then they have 3 months to be able to train. And now you can get people to actually have a little bit more skin in the game when it comes to the season in general, or what their season is. For most of those people, if you're on the cusp of registering for the Open, you're probably not planning on going to quarters and semis, but you have a goal now. Yeah. And we all know how much having like a specific tangible goal then improves compliance over time. It improves training consistency over time, which is what everybody wants. We want everybody, as many people as possible, training consistently, training with intent, training with a purpose. And so if you give somebody that goal,
hormones.
Yeah, that too.
That's what I heard.
Well, as a coach, I love that idea, because now the person is now held accountable by the date of the Open starting.
Yeah.
And like, I already signed up, I paid, even if it's only $15 or $20, like it's still something that they're looking forward to. And then they rely on their coach to help them with that process.
Yeah. It extends the timeline for them to be able to create a little bit more external motivation around their training. And it just, hopefully it casts a broader net to get more people to jump in at that level. So I thought that was a really interesting change, and I kind of like why they did it.
Yeah. One of the things they didn't really announce, they just said the start of the Open. But what we noticed when we're building out our templates for our online program or for our individual athletes, the Open actually starts a week earlier than it has in the past 5 or 6 years. And so that may not matter to most people, but we're thinking about the year as a whole. And the way that we structure our programs, obviously, we're going through the end of this year. On our online program, we have a cool competition called Winter is Coming. And we have a deload time over the holidays. For those that celebrate Christmas or New Year's, that's a really tough time to train competitively. Most people are traveling, or most people are with family, or maybe they're just eating bad. They have some alcohol or whatever it is. And so we always try to structure that as like, okay, we're going to give you some time to deload, and then we start our training peak in January. But now we have only 6 weeks of a buildup as opposed to 7 or 8 weeks like we've had in the past. So as a coach, does that matter to you? Are you thinking about that for any of your athletes?
I think most of the people who sign up for one-on-one coaching are at the point now where they're trying to make the best out of that open experience. And so it is very, very valuable to have that time. I don't have a ton of people right now who are basically in it for health and wellness who might do the open at a social level. So that extra week or two there after the winter break is important. It is valuable. And I think the other thing that I take into account there is just trying to spread the season out a little bit more so it's not quite so dense. You don't have to go right from open, right into quarters, right into semis, maybe last chance, and then into the games. There's just you never get a chance to get your head above water there. So as a coach, I like it. I like trying to spread things out a little bit more, protect some time windows in there for be able to train. I think there's lots of good benefits down the line as well when it comes to that.
Yeah, I really like them thinking about how to space it out correctly.
Yeah.
You know, it seemed like, and it probably still will be this way this year just because it still is turning over pretty fast, but last year seemed very chaotic in that those that went to quarterfinals, you have a week and you do quarterfinals, and then it's like, you got to go right away into prepping for semifinals because some started earlier than others. So some had maybe 3 extra weeks of training time, whereas others only had 2 weeks of training time before semifinals, and you had to deload for that. And then it was like right after semifinals, you're thinking about 4 weeks of games training, and it just becomes a very long season.
Yeah, the other thing that Max and I talked about when we were trying to give some of the feedback after the games was trying to split the open from like this grassroots participation, like everybody do their own thing, from the actual track of the professional athlete to get to the games. The reason being because exactly that reason, it elongates the season for those people. And we would say unnecessarily. I think what they're trying to do with the open now by adding this sort of like strength of field calculation and making the open part of that is to still keep the elite athletes participating in that.
Yeah, engaged.
And keep them engaged at that point, make sure that they're not just going through the motions. I think in their mind, it is going to help improve participation at the affiliate side of things. You're doing the same workouts as the Tias, as the Maderas, as the Alexises. Like, there's value in that, and I know that there's value in that. As a coach, sometimes selfishly, I do kind of wish that they would separate the two because I think it keeps things cleaner. I think that it's a way to make sure that you're not overextending the top name athletes from trying to make their season a little bit too long. But if you can frame it appropriately and just say like, hey, this is the open. Yes, it does kind of factor into the strength of field calculation if you're trying to take the next steps inside of the sport. But I still think approach it with the appropriate amount of intensity and intent so that you're not just competing for 6-7 months, whatever the actual timeline is now.
Yeah, I think most of the people that you just named are so good that they can go into the open without, they're not peaking for that, right? Yeah. You're not thinking about Alexis like, oh, we have to really crush the open. She's going to crush it no matter what. Not to say that she's taking it easy, but you're not preparing her for that. You're preparing her for semifinals in the games because that's what matters to her. But for most of our audience, they're trying to get into that top 10%, or they're in quarterfinals and they're trying to get to semifinals. So the way that their training may shift is now they are peaking for quarterfinals to qualify for that semifinal. And that's another big change that they made this year. CrossFit has announced that they're going to program all the semifinals. And then the way that they're breaking it up, and you probably have more details on this, but like let's say here in the US, it'll be 60 at the East Coast and 60 on the West Coast, and CrossFit will actually run those events.
Yes. They're all going to be the same workouts, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, across all semifinals, I think they're going to standardize the program.
I freaking love that.
Yeah, I think that's something that we can all get on board with. I think that there's always going to be biases from an event organizer standpoint about what it is that they want to test, but I just don't think that that's a clear definition of a professional sport that has like varied tests to then get to the same level. You're going to get different kinds of athletes that make that jump. Maybe you got in a bad place that had a bad mix of workouts, but in another semifinal you would have made it. It just doesn't seem like a fair setup, a normalized setup. So I really like this. I'm excited to see where it goes. The question that you had before about them running the events. So we, again, in our feedback to CrossFit, we had talked about the struggles of an event organizer to be able to make an event that is profitable, that's enjoyable, that's fulfilling for them. That's a huge struggle. It's a huge struggle. There's places that we think have done it right in terms of, I think it was Strength and Depth and Granite Games who had multiple divisions competing. They made it a whole experience out of it. They probably have a better chance of being profitable. But at the end of the day, it's almost like 70-80% of these semifinal events are losing money. And you can't expect the sport to be sustainable. You can't expect the sport to continue to grow at the rate that we all want it to grow if it's happening at that semifinal level. And so CrossFit, yes, they want to protect their own interests, right? They want to make sure that the sport doesn't lose reputation or anything else. But I also think that they have a better chance of standardizing a lot of the logistic things that go on behind the scenes at a semifinal to make the best out of that experience and make it as profitable as possible. So when they say that they're going to take over North American and European semifinals, they want to make sure that it's a show. They want to make sure that it's done right. They want to make sure that things are happening the way that they should be happening, and that the sport can continue to grow not in spite of those, but because of those. I think right now, like any growth that we had, we were basically just trying to get through that semifinal level.
Right.
You can't have whatever it was, 8, 10 out of the semifinals all losing money. Like, who's going to want to host them anymore?
Yeah, to your point, at Syndicate and MAC, where they had it both in Knoxville, the stands were empty.
Yeah.
And it's crazy because there were some amazing athletes.
There wasn't that many stands to begin with.
Well, that's true. I don't know, maybe 5,000 seats in there or something like that in that arena. But it's hard to guess how many people actually were there. But it was less than 500 to 1,000, so somewhere in there, right? Yeah. That, to me, I think is the kind of the first step to figuring out how do we get the stands full so at least we have paying people coming in to watch the events. And most of the people in the stands are probably just family and friends or coaches.
Yeah.
So is there a way that CrossFit can make it more entertaining to the normal viewer?
Yeah, I don't know about the entertaining side of it. That's a question that I've had for a long time. It's hard to follow what's happening on the stream just because there's so many moving pieces. There's so many different ways that different movements are scored inside of the same workout. Even the timing chips are off sometimes. We saw that at Rogue over the weekend.
Right.
It's a challenging sport to try and present to a common viewer, like somebody who's not deeply invested in the sport. I don't know how to solve those problems. I do know that one of the ways that they're trying to improve the attendance of semifinals is trying to release those dates farther ahead of time.
Yeah.
So if you've got, say Travis and Alexis make it to a semifinal from here, at the start of the season, we're going to have those dates and locations so much farther in advance than we used to have that now everybody here inside of these walls can plan their travel. They can plan those dates and protect them. And Alexis and Travis can protect those dates inside of their training schedule too. We're not finding out 3 weeks before we have to go to a semifinal. We're finding out months in advance. So I think it helps with participation. I think it helps with attendance. You can get the butts in the seats because now they know, like, hey, if I want to go watch them, it's 3 hours away on this weekend. That's 6 weeks away. I can make this travel ahead of time and protect that. I thought that was cool. It takes away some of the unnecessary, unknown, and unknowable from the season structure. So they're definitely trying to get out ahead of that, and we'll see what happens with the attendance numbers as a result. Yeah,
I think that helps both the viewer, the normal fan that wants to go, because it's going to be much cheaper to book those ahead of time. To give you some examples, when we knew they were going back to Knoxville, as coaches, we know we're going to be there because we're going to have semifinal athletes. I looked ahead of time before we knew the dates and just it has to be sometime in May. And when I looked originally, it was half the cost of once I actually found out when those dates were. Yeah. So, I mean, we spent thousands of dollars going up there multiple weeks in a row. And the same thing when we go to the games. And so the normal fan can reduce their costs, which I think maybe means that they're more likely to go. Yeah. But then also and we just saw this with, which athlete said they weren't going to Dubai? So somebody, a high level athlete.
Cornway, I think.
Okay, yeah. So that's a perfect example, right? He's like, it's going to cost me $6,000. Well, even from Atlanta to Knoxville for Travis, if he's going up there, he has to think about, I need a hotel for 3 to 4, maybe even 5 nights if he wants to get up there early. Yeah. He's got to think about all his food. He's got to plan, if he needs to bring someone up, a PT to help him. It's thousands of dollars just for a weekend trip. And that's a cost that maybe people don't, or CrossFit hasn't taken into account beforehand. And so it's really nice to see them planning ahead. And that's another big change that they've made.
Yeah, the other thing that they've tried to do, I don't know if it's going to end up helping the athletes or not, is the geographical split now for the semifinals. So it's not just based off of seeding, it's based off of your location when you do the workouts, and that's how you're going to be able to determine which semifinal you're going to go to. I think that they're trying to solve the issue with the strength of field problem, which I think it's more complicated than what they're giving it credit for, but I can see what they're doing. They're trying to make sure that each semifinal has enough high-level athletes that there's good bang for the buck, that they can still get butts in the seats at each one of these and not just overload one over the other. I still think it's going to be really, really challenging to make sure that there is equitable distribution of qualification spots based off of those geographical boundaries, which are somewhat arbitrary. Like they say, like, it's easy to look at all of the training camps in, let's just say, North America. There's a huge East Coast bias on the training camps in North America. It's just plain as day. The West Coast has less. I mean, there's more land out there, whatever else. CrossFit started in California, but I think that it's been a progressive sort of shift over to the East Coast for whatever reason. I don't know why. How can you draw an arbitrary line to try and make it as evenly balanced as possible between East and West? I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to solve that problem. And they're going to try and do it ahead of time. And the other thing that they said on that podcast, which I thought was interesting, is that line that gets drawn that actually divides the East and the West. It's not just based off of strength of depth of high-level athletes. It's also based off of their affiliate map and their regional directors, organizers. So it's making sure that it's a way that I think that they're trying to make sure that the two different brands of the business are in alignment as much as possible. But it's also like, is this really serving the best purposes right now? Because
you're saying the outcome is going to be that the West is going to have a weaker showing?
I think it's pretty straightforward right now for anybody looking at it that the East is going to be much, much harder to advance to and out of than the West Coast if you're looking at the North American
If they split it up
semifinal.
the way that they've suggested. I think there's going to...
So move to the West Coast right now?
I think
I think that CrossFit's going to have to come back. I assume that they will and clarify that that's not how they're going to do it.
No.
And I could be wrong on this. I just, in my mind, there's no way that I could rationalize that system because, to Adam's point, I mean, just throw out some of the big brands: Proven, Mayhem, Comp Train, Hard Work Pays Off, Training Think Tank, Brute. Everyone is on the East Coast, and all of them have games level athletes. And so you're going to throw all of them into that bucket, and you're going to have... the field would be so strong that you would have to take 20 athletes to the games from there. And not to mention that, well, if they're only going to take 60 or whatever the number would be, how do they manage to pick those people and then lose out on other semifinal spots?
There's two big problems there. The one is what you just said, the qualification from semis to games, which they can try and solve that as much as possible. They can say, all right, each semifinal has a minimum of 3 or 5 or whatever that number is. And then we're going to keep this pool behind of 10 to 12 to 15 extra spots, which we're then going to reallocate based off of the strength of field calculation that we do after the quarterfinals. I still don't think it's equitable when you do it like that, just because of the density of performance camps that are on the East Coast in North America. And that's not, I'm ignorant of what's going on everywhere else. It's just where I'm at. And it's like, yeah, I'm selfish.
Does everyone else seem to agree with you? Have you heard anybody else talk? Has this come up?
Yeah, no, I've heard lots of other people try and address it. But the problem is we just don't have a rule book yet. So we don't know where the boundary is going to be drawn. We don't know how the allocation is going to take place. We're all just looking at this being like, that looks like a nightmare. And I don't know how you solve that problem. Maybe they do. Maybe they're smarter than we are and they figured it out. And like, they're just, the rule book's going to come out in a couple of weeks and we'll be like, oh, look at that. That's
and
pretty
if they
cool.
don't figure it out, what are we going to end up with?
I don't know. I think what's going to end up happening, which nobody wants, is you might get games level athletes who deserve to be in the top 40 in their division not making it because they got stuck in a region that was just so dense and they got to, they just can't go through.
Not much different than being in Central East many moons ago.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say that it is very similar, but even worse.
But that was multiple regions at least. You had a little more options.
Correct.
Here it's just 2.
You have 2, and if
2.
you had 30 games level athletes that are competing for only a few spots, then you're not actually getting the fittest to the games. I think that they're going to fix that, and the rule book's going to come out, and we're going to be like, okay, that makes sense. But just because, again, I can't rationalize it in my head, but I've also seen CrossFit make those mistakes in the past because they are not covering their bases. They're not thinking about it the way that we're thinking about it.
Yeah. The other side that you were alluding to before was was a stage before that.
Yes.
Those numbers are set in stone, right? Like we know that there's going to be 60 individuals, that there's going to is it 40 teams that go through?
I believe so.
That's set at each one of those. And it's like, even when you increase the density of the field, it's going to be that much harder to go from quarters to semis now, let alone semis to games. But now you're trying to do this, and we know that those spots at semis are constrained. So say that they do solve the allocation problem from semis to games. I don't know how they're going to do it. This problem here, you don't get solved. So now if you've got, it used to be 120.
What's the problem there?
So it used to be 120. The top 120 in North America advanced to semifinals, and then they just split them up based off of the seeding across all of the 4 semifinals. Mm-hmm. Now, if you've got 2 camps, 60 and 60, 80 of the former 120 could have been out here on the East Coast now, but now only 60 of them get a spot. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So out of the 120 before, maybe 75% of them are on the East Coast. Now you're missing out on a huge chunk of those people just because of the location.
Yeah, that's where they have to say, hey, if it's the 60, then those 20 just move to the West Coast. There has to be a system in place.
You think we'll see people move?
Well, people did that in the past with regionals. I had some athletes that went to the Southwest region when that was a thing because it was much easier and they qualified and almost made the games. And the person wasn't that good at the time. And so that's not a knock on the person or the region. I'm just saying like
they're taking advantage of the setup.
They couldn't get into the Southeast region and they qualified and finished like 6th in Southwest. So like there's a huge difference when you do it by geographical region just because of the nature of now, especially now with training camps or more people do CrossFit on a certain coast or whatever it may be. That's where CrossFit can think about the seeding system. You'd utilize that and just take the best 120 and then split them up. 1 goes west, 2 goes east, 3 goes west, 4 goes east, and then just divide it that way. And as long as you tell them ahead of time that's how it's going to work, then everyone knows still when they need to purchase their flights, when they need to purchase their hotels, and all of that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we'll see where it ends up going.
Do you think that I'm wrong, that they're not going to change that?
I don't know. Is
the shit show that would come from it going to be so large that they're going to want to fix this?
Well, I mean, the problem is, like, we can sit here and cry about that. It might be unfair for, you took away, there's more spots here, there's less spots here. It's harder for us on the East Coast, blah, blah, blah. Like what Chris said, it's happened before. Like, this has been the sport. Like, and it also happens in the Olympics, like the U.S. gets a certain amount of spots. The European countries get a certain amount of spots. Maybe it's harder to qualify one out of the other. Like, it's just a problem. Sports aren't always fair. Life isn't fair. Maybe it's just the nature of it. They're trying to do the best they can to solve a problem that we're all seeing. I just don't know how to do that. So,
yeah, to an extent, I agree. But those are so different. Like, you talk about the Olympics, and of course, like, we know the U.S. is much more competitive, but everyone knows that they're starting with 4 spots.
Especially when the point is to find the fittest, and like,
exactly.
If that wasn't the point, if it was just, hey, who gets the most points? But if you're saying you're finding the fittest and then you take out the people who are doing better, that seems off.
Yeah. If like the NBA, they're finding the best guys, or I think about golf because I love it. They have 125 tour spots every year. They're finding the best 125 guys, and there's a point system for that. And so they rank them. It's not like, you grew up in Florida, you can't. Yeah. Sorry, you can't come in.
Well, the good thing that they said is the strength of field calculation is going to exist over the course of the season, and it's going to be ongoing. They might even include some it's not off-season competitions, but off-brand competitions into that calculation, and that's just going to be something that they continue to do over time. It's not just living inside of that season; it's going to be constantly updating. So they're going to have a ranking, they're going to be able to rank these athletes against each other. So there's a means if they want to be able to involve that inside of their calculations for allocating spots. I like that. I like having the flexibility of being objective about it if possible. That's the big thing is like when you draw this arbitrary line north-south through the Mississippi, it's like, what went into that? But now if you can draw that line based off of, hey, here's the actual ranking across all the North American athletes. We know how many are on this side. We know how many are on this side. This is our best chance to be able to make this as fair as possible. Great. I hope that they make that data public. I'm not sure if they're going to or not, but if you can see that change over time, then it's like you're just making everything as transparent as possible. And now any judgment calls that you make, people can understand why. I think, again, the big problem that we've had with CrossFit in the past is they might make rulings or decisions off of that in the dark. Yeah. Like, we don't know what went into that. We don't know what's going on behind the scenes. We're invested in the growth of the sport. Bring us in. It's like, I know that we weren't going to talk about Rogue, but one of the things that I thought Rogue did really well is they listened to the athletes' feedback and they adjusted things on the fly, and it made the competition so much smoother and so much better and so much. It just felt like a team effort, and that's what we want. Like, we want to help CrossFit grow. We want to give you feedback because we want what you want. So bring us into the loop. And so when it comes to like making that sort of data transparent and publicly accessible and let everybody see it. And then when you make a decision, people can be like, yeah, I understand why they did that. I might not agree with it, but at least I understand why they did that.
So let me ask you about the ranking system because I too love it. But does that mean that athletes will have to compete more often to keep their ranking high in the off season? Like, what happens if someone, tweaks their knee, but then they have to do Rogue and then they have to do Wadapalooza? Like, is that a dangerous system to have, or do you like that concept?
I like the concept. I don't know what's going to go into it. I don't know if it's participation based or if it's just like average finish every time that you do participate. So it's not necessarily seated for the amount of people who do like 10 competitions in a year, or if you do 3 competitions.
Yeah, so like Fraser, let's say he only did the games. Yeah, he just would destroy everyone.
But then he ranks lower than somebody who competed 20 times. Yeah, I can't see that happening. But again, I don't know how they do those calculations.
Yeah, I actually think that could set us up for some really fun off-season competitions. Like Rogue was great, and they do a really good job. We'll have another podcast on that because I would nitpick some of the programming choices, especially on the female side. But in general, it's a really fun thing to watch, and everyone's excited about it. And the same thing, like even Wadapalooza, people love going down there because of the spectacle that it is. If we could have those where they really meant a lot for the full season, I think that could be a really cool way to grow the sport.
Yeah, you get more high-level athletes at those competitions if you have them put a little bit of skin in the game instead of just saying like, hey, come down here, you might win a little bit of prize money. But if your seeding or placement is going to change as a result of your participation, maybe it's better for the sport. And then it becomes on the onus of the athlete and the coach to make sure that they're not overextending themselves over the course of the season.
Well, so that was my next question because that's the danger, right? Like if I'm going to do Rogue and then I'm going to do Dubai and then I'm going to do Wadapalooza. Some people end up doing that, which is just incredible to me that they're that resilient. But if you do all of that and then you have to go through the CrossFit season, how long can someone last in the sport and at a high level?
It's not long. We've seen it happen. We've seen people burn out on less of a structure than that. It doesn't take much at this level, especially competing at the intensity that they do. This turnaround between the games and the Rogue, honestly, in my opinion, was too quick.
Yeah, it was fast.
It was really, really fast. And you get people... All right, I'm not going to go down a rabbit hole on Rogue. That turnaround was too fast. But to answer your question, you can't do 2 to 3 of those off-season competitions in your off-season. There's just not space for it. There's not space to protect training blocks to be able to improve upon the things that you want, and there's not space to be able to recover in between those competitions to be able to train at an intensity and like a resilience level that's going to keep you safe over time. You're just setting yourself up for it to be like, eventually the wheels are going to fall off.
Yeah, I mean, what if they made the competitions like one day? So if Rogue had 3 really great tests and then that was it and you knew that, maybe it's not worth traveling to, but if the points were on the line, then everyone still would go.
I think the problem with that is going to be, we were at Rogue, and one of the things I kept asking the people around me is like, how is Rogue making money off of this?
Right.
But what ended up happening was they took a competition, they extended the timeline, they added a strongman division to it. They need butts in the seats. I don't think you get butts in the seats with a one-day competition like that.
True.
And then the overhead of putting on that big of a show becomes too large compared to the money that you're bringing in. So you need more people there for longer windows of time to be able to justify that.
Yeah, that makes sense. But Rogue also, I think they had like $1 billion in revenue last year. So they
maybe
have
not
the money.
counting on the ticket sales.
Yeah.
Are there any other changes we haven't talked about?
Yeah, so I think the team change is probably one of the biggest because now you're talking about, if I understand this correctly, you can have super teams again.
That's the understanding. And they, on the podcast that Justin and Adrian did with Sean and Tommy, they didn't come out and say, we're trying to make super teams a thing again. Their big thing was they wanted to simplify the process. There was a lot
Which is good.
Yeah, there's a lot of instances last year where people either weren't clear on the stipulations on what it took to be a training team, and they either didn't follow the rule book, or they did follow the rule book in a way that they couldn't show the documentation that they did, and they ended up getting disqualified. Or on the other side, you have teams who seemed like they're above, they did all the documentation, CrossFit approved on them, and then it's like, hey, wait, those people weren't training in the same location. So it went both ways, and it was just too complicated. The waters were too muddy. And so now they're saying, hey, we're going to do the best we can to simplify this process for everybody. We're just going to say, if you can do the open in the same location, then you guys can be on a team together. The team quarterfinal workouts have to be done in person.
Right.
So that part's already taken care of. If you can do the open with your teammates, then you can going forward, you can establish that team. So what it does is, like you said, it opens up for a lot more fun teams to get put together as long as they can get together for just that short time window.
Yeah. Chris has asked this question before, switching it to 3-person teams. And down the road, I would actually really like to see that, 3 males,
Same
3
sex,
females. Yeah. Like they do at Wadapalooza, because that's a lot of fun to watch.
The only people that I've asked, and I've asked a lot now, the only people who don't like that are people who are currently
teams.
on a team.
That is funny.
On the
same
4-person team?
Yeah. People who are on that, they haven't said yes, but everyone else has been like, yeah, that's awesome. Why aren't they doing that?
Well, I thought about Wadapalooza. It made both divisions so entertaining. Watching the females, I was like, my goodness, they're so good together. And the same thing with the males. Watching even last year, Travis, Noah, and Chandler compete against other high-level males was it was really enjoyable to watch. There were no bottlenecks from one sex to the other or anything like that.
There's going to be some legit teams at Wadapalooza this year in that 3-person format. There's going to be some legit teams, and that's going to be fun to watch. Wadapalooza did it on purpose. They made the team competition the first 2 days of the event, and then the individual competitions the next 2 days.
It's genius.
Yeah,
I
think
love
it's
that.
Really, really smart. I think that it reduces the overhead, like we were talking about before, in terms of trying to have everybody going at the same time. Now you can actually get the individuals to maybe participate in both. It's the same number of competition days that they would have had if they just did the one before. Now it's like you have 4 competition days, but you can take place in 2 divisions, have twice as much chances to be able to make money off of your trip. And it's just fun. It's just fun for them to get together like that.
So I think my last question would be, now that Rich is, I think, gone, we'll see if that changes. He may end up having a team.
I would assume Masters is the next step, but we'll see.
Yeah. So is there a team on your radar that will replace them at the top? Or who do you think is going to leave the individual competition this next year and set up a team?
I've heard a lot of rumors. I'm not going to say any names.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not going to say any names.
Did Mayhem say if they're going to continue a team?
For sure.
Right? I mean, they're going to put a team out. You just don't know what it's going to look like. I know that they had, was it 3 teams at the games or 2 teams?
I think it was 3 teams.
Yeah, so they've got legit people there, and it's, they can easily make another team that's going to challenge for the podium without Rich. I don't think that that's in question. I think it's going to be interesting to see who tries to step up to fill that gap at the top now. I don't know if people are going to make the transition from individual to team just for that, but I think that it does make it a little bit more of an interesting conversation now. That CrossFit Oslo that gave them such a run for their money, somebody like that who's got things so dialed in from a team perspective. I mean, the individuals are still really good. That makes it still, I want to believe that a team like that, who's somewhat homegrown and has trained together and it's not made of star-studded athletes, can still go out there and be able to compete with a super team who's thrown together at the last minute just because, like, that's be fun. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the problem with the team competition has always been the depth. There are a few good teams, and then even though, I mean, look, everyone that makes it is amazing. But when you look at the individuals, maybe they're lacking a few things. Yeah. Some of them can't do handstand push-ups, or one's bottlenecked by ring muscle-ups, and so then they end up getting crushed in certain workouts. It would be really cool with the super team concept of having more high-level individuals go team, and then now you have 15 or 20 teams all competitive in those events, because in the past we've seen Mayhem just kind of run away with things, or maybe only have one or two other teams that can be competitive. Yeah. And as much as that's cool for Mayhem, it's not fun to watch. It's more like Rogue was much more entertaining on the male side, because like Medeiros probably should have lost, but he did a great job and finished strong. But it's fun when people are competitive.
Man, if you can get it down to that last test and have a lot on the line, it's so much more fun from a viewer perspective. And like they know that they're not dumb. Like they try to build up narratives ahead of time of the people who are going to compete with Mayhem, whether it actually happened at the end of the day or not. That's separate. But they know that if they can get more interest in the team side of things, it's just another chance for them to increase the exposure of the sport, because that's what they need. They need more people who are invested in what's going to happen, who will watch every single day, who will go to these things, buy their tickets, buy the vendor stuff. And I think that if you can make a bigger spectacle of the team side of things, you're just doing yourself such a big favor.
Yeah. Any other changes?
I actually, there was one that I wrote down, and it's Masters and Teen. Everything kind of stays the same. They're only taking 10 again. I really hope that they change that in the future. And I think they mentioned that they may expand it out in the future. But it's just, the competition is different when you only have 10 people and the scoring is from 1 to 10 as opposed to even 20. Yeah. Like it just changes it, because then, if you finish 8th out of the top 10 in the world, that's still a really, really good score. But if you only get 10 points for that event, you're basically knocked out. And we saw that from some people last year of having one, not even a bad event, but in a sprint event, you finish 8th by 1 second. Yeah. And then all of a sudden you went from 1st to 6th place overall in the division. I don't like that setup. So I would like to have more depth in the Masters and Teen divisions. And then the adapted divisions will be able to go to the games this year. All of them, which I think is really cool.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, don't get me started on the scoring system, though.
Wait, what? Did they change it?
No, what he's saying is basically what we've been preaching for years. But But there's things in place.
Right.
Mr. Watkins is doing a great job with that. I hope that it continues to sort of gain traction.
For sure.
Yeah.
You got anything, Chris?
I did, but now I forgot it.
Give us a real good heck yeah, heck nah. Something off the top of your head right now.
All right. Heck yeah or heck nah. Frozen candy over room temperature candy.
Heck yeah. As long as it's not, room temperature, if it's melty, it's awful.
Yeah.
I had a Reese's in my truck that I just ate, and it was just all over my hands. Yeah.
That's the best part about kids is you find candy in places that you don't expect. Like, bonus candy.
I'll have this.
Ooh, piece of candy.
Yeah, I like it cold. I'll give a heck yeah on that.
On the cold?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. What about hot pizza versus cold pizza?
Ooh. Certain pizzas are better than others at cold.
Absolutely, yeah.
Jordan, she always gets pineapple on her pizza, and I don't like it when it's hot, but I took one out of the fridge.
Did you divorce her yet?
Well, here's the thing. I got it out of the fridge, and it was delicious when the pineapple was cold.
Yeah. So I honestly don't know the answer to this. Do they cook the pizza with the pineapple on it, or do they sprinkle it on afterwards?
No, with it.
Well, at your pie,
so the pineapple is cooked.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I didn't know that. I thought it was.
Or at least at Papa John's, that's how we did it.
Oh yeah, you would know.
That was the worst too, having to dig into that fucking pineapple. Like, come on, bro.
Did you have a glove on when you did that?
I
Sometimes.
don't think we did.
Sometimes. Oh my! That's pre-COVID, man. Like you just live your life.
So gross.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't think we did.
I just think about I shouldn't even think about this because I don't want to go out to eat. But what are they doing in the kitchen? There are people that
are they doing? Dude, you probably eating some weird shit.
I'm eating some real bad stuff, man. That's what I'm saying. If someone gets mad at you, or they just are lazy in the back, they don't put gloves on. You
got Chris grabbing handfuls of pineapple, barehanded.
He was just scratching his butt.
Coming in hot.
I never saw anything too crazy at Papa John's, so there's a plus.
Good. I like Papa John's. I don't want to have a tainted view of their pizza.
All right, best pizza place.
Recently I'm a mellow mushroom guy.
I love mellow mushroom.
I love mellow.
It's expensive though. That's the problem.
It is very.
What about
very
out of the big
expensive.
three though? What's your favorite of the big three?
Domino's.
You just say Domino's because he said Domino's?
No, we get Domino's probably twice a week at our house.
Yeah. I don't know why. Most people don't like Domino's.
That crust.
I like Domino's. I think I go Pizza Hut, but just it's more of I just like a dirty, nasty, greasy pizza,
I want to eat pizza and I want to stall myself afterwards.
In my opinion. Their marinara is good.
Oh, the sauce is the best.
Little Caesars has a good marinara too, but their pizza's kind of sus.
Yeah, I don't know.
But it's $5. I mean, it's worth it.
I wouldn't rave about Domino's sauce. I would rave about their crust and the seasoning on the crust, which is
it's very good. I like their thin crust too.
Yeah,
both styles.
Now, when it comes to your dessert pies and accessorize, what do y'all pick?
I don't do the dessert pies.
All I remember is going to Pizza Hut as a kid when they had the buffet, the all-you-can-eat buffet, and then they had the.
We used to do that after soccer camps.
Amazing, right?
Yeah, they'd see us coming from a mile away.
Do they still have those open?
The
buffets?
Mm-hmm.
I heard they're bringing them back. They switched all the Pizza Hut logos now. If you drive around, you'll see they're starting to switch back to the 90s logo.
Really?
Oh, nice.
Which is
they should do the 90s restaurant setup too then with the buffet.
I used to see they changed it to Wing Street, didn't they? Or is that just like a brand
that
they had?
They added it into there.
Oh, okay.
But you know what? I wish Chili's would go back to the 90s with the tile.
Oh, man,
all the tile, photos everywhere.
Also very nostalgic.
And cook the crispers how you used to, for the love of...
What'd they change?
I don't know, man. That's just not the same.
You know what I used to love is when there were like 6 chips stuck together.
No.
And they're chips and salsa?
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Where you get that one where it's like mushy a little bit.
You can dip hard with that one.
Yes. Yeah. So good.
All right. That's all the time we have.
All right, peeps.